Welcome to Business Owner Bootcamp, the Wealthspire Advisors podcast designed to help business owners and entrepreneurs take control of their finances. Hosts and financial advisors Michael Delgass and Sandy Wiggins break down key topics like tax strategies, exit planning, business valuations, and real-world experiences with expert guests. And now, here are your hosts, Michael Delgass and Sandy Wiggins.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Mike Delgass, and this is the Business Owner Bootcamp podcast from Wealthspire Advisors. We are your go-to resource for financial strategies and insights in helping business owners and entrepreneurs take control of their finances and prepare for the future of their businesses. Today, we're discussing pre-sale planning. And joining me are Gail Harris and Oliver Pursche, two of our advisors here at Wealthspire, who are experts at exit planning for business owners. Gail, let me start with you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
To have you here.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Could you please introduce yourself, tell us what you do, your work with business owners, and talk a little bit about your expertise with our audience?
I would love to do so. I have worked with business owners for the majority of my career. After leaving the Navy, after 4 years of service, I spent 9 years as a commercial lender. So worked with business owners up close and personal. It gave me a real appreciation for the values that they bring to our community, as well as some of the special planning considerations that are necessary in my role as a wealth manager. And so it was sort of a natural transition for me when I converted from being a commercial lender to being a wealth advisor, that I, worked directly with a number of business owners throughout my career. So that's a little bit of my background. And I have chosen to make this more of a specialty by even obtaining a special designation and working with business owners on exit planning. That's how important I think it is.
Thanks, Gail. Oliver, welcome to you also. Could you do the same? Introduce yourself and tell us about your work with business owners.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. My name is Oliver Pursche. I've been working with entrepreneurs and business owners and founders for about 20 years. Started with my involvement with EY and their World Entrepreneur of the Year program, as well as their strategic growth program, and then working for a family office, multifamily office that had an investment banking unit and a merchant banking unit, where we really dug in and helped certain business owners either buy or sell their businesses, meaning buy from the acquisition perspective. Joined Wealthspire about 5 years ago, and that's been a focus of my work, continuing to work with entrepreneurs, founding partners on their businesses, and how to think about an eventual exit, whatever that may look like.
Thank you. So look, let's start with the when. That is, you've both worked with business owners at many stages of the business life cycle. And through the sales process. When do you think people should start thinking about sale? Like, when should the planning start?
I'm smiling because I think this is one of the most important questions to ask. And I have to emphatically state as early as possible. And I think you would hear that from any advisor that works with business owners through the exit process. And a number of reasons to do that. One is it is the single largest financial transaction that most owners go through. So it is not something that you want to enter in haphazardly. You want to think very deeply about the process. And then there are a number of other advantages to starting early. And I don't know, maybe Oliver, you want to kick in with some of the really core reasons to start early.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Gail. Yeah, I mean, as early as possible, kind of almost on day one when you start the business, makes sense. I look at it two ways. The things that you need to do to prepare for the sale of your business are just good business planning, period. So you're helping the business while you're preparing to sell, even though that may be 10, 15, 20 years from now. Secondly, a lot of times what I've found in my experience is certain life events cause a change in the way you're thinking. You may have children in the business thinking that they will take over the business at some point and realizing that, no, that's not what's going to happen for one reason or another. There are a number of different triggers. So thinking through different scenarios, working with the right group of people when appropriate to strategically think about what an exit looks like and what the options are makes the most amount of sense. And that requires time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add one thing to that is a lot of owners aren't aware by planning early, they also have the opportunity to increase the ultimate exit value of their businesses. There's just so much that might be under their control if they give themselves enough time. So it's another really imperative reason to start the process early. And I think, Oliver, you hinted at it. There's a lot of reasons to delay doing it. It's easy to sort of put it off until another day. So it's really important to set those milestones. So maybe to make it an imperative to do it, maybe on a specific anniversary of your business, 5th anniversary, 10th anniversary, that's a trigger that might work for you to start it. The other is an age. When you start thinking about retirement or when a child reaches a certain milestone age, those are really good triggers to say, this year, I'm going to make this an imperative.
I think there are probably some tax-related triggers also to think about, some of which have very kind of hard deadlines and others of which are just kind of as early as possible works the best. Do you guys want to pick up?
Yeah. I mean, Mike, you're probably alluding to the qualified small business stock exclusion, which allows you to eliminate a large chunk of capital gains. One of the requirements is that you need to do certain things at least 5 years prior to the sale of the business. So, you know, it's not wake up on Tuesday, I'm planning on selling the business next month.
Yeah.
You know, and when you're talking about excluding up to $10 million from capital gains taxes, that's a huge number. And you know, at the end of the day, and one of the things that all business owners need to evaluate over time is what's my selling price, but what's my net? And if you can save a lot of money on taxes through proper planning, through foresight, that becomes very, very important and impactful.
Yeah.
And to sort of build on that, there are also opportunities to save on ultimate estate taxes. You have the ability to transfer shares of your business well before any kind of an exit when the value might be lower at a discounted value for the benefit of heirs, as well as there are some opportunities for you to have access to some of those funds as well as saving on estate taxes. So that's a big opportunity, but not only do you transfer the value of your business at a discounted value, you also can transfer the future appreciation. So that's a huge benefit long-term.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. We'll have some episodes that talk specifically about some of these tax planning opportunities and get into a little bit more of the weeds there. But, you know, with respect to the qualified small business stock exclusion, you know, that it's $10 million to start, but it could be much, much bigger than that. I mean, we're talking about potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of tax savings. And the trigger there is kind of when do you move from a loss position to a gain position? So typically you'd want to have losses passing through, and then to get the QSBS shelter, you would convert to some other kind of structure, a C Corp structure. Yeah, so a lot of other good things to think about, to plan for, that we'll talk about more when we talk more about tax planning. But thanks, guys. So how do you get started, right? I mean, as early as possible, great. You know, easier said than done sometimes, because you're also trying to run a business and get it started. But how do you make this into manageable steps, and where do you start?
I think, like any other really important decision you make in the course of your lifetime, you always want to start by defining what your goals are. You know, what does success look like to you? And that could take many, many forms. It could be a timeline. You know, is there a certain age when you want to sort of pass along the keys and retire? Do you have specific goals on who you think should succeed you in the business? Is it a family member? Is there a competitor maybe that you have a good regard to, that you might like to be the ultimate buyer of the company? It's all this whole host of things. Those are all considerations that you should take in setting your goals. Another one that often comes up sometimes later in the process is what are your feelings about the impact of your business on your key employees and the local community? Perhaps you have some goals on how you want them taken care of. The better you are at defining these upfront, the more likely you are to achieve all of them through the exit process.
Oliver, what do you think? What are some others?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, to me, the very first step is sit down with your spouse or significant other and family members and say, hey, what do you see happening once the business is gone? Right? And have that human conversation. One of the things that's often overlooked, and I know you've experienced this yourself, Michael, is we focus so much on the numbers, we forget about the human component of it. And that's multifaceted. It involves the employees and the key management people that Gail just referred to, but also the family members. And for most entrepreneurial founders, the business is their baby, right? That's what they're focused for the last 20, 30, 40 years, whatever the time frame is. And so talking about what's next, talking about that through that with the family, is really, really important. And to me, that's the very first step to go through. And then start thinking about a timeline, start thinking about what success looks like Gail spoke about. And then engage with the right professionals, financial advisors, accountants, lawyers, to talk through the various components that are going to be required so that you have an understanding. Doesn't mean you have to pull the trigger today, but it means you should have an understanding and knowledge of what to expect.
Yeah, and just wanted to add another thing to that, and that's the financial component. So it may not be the number one, but it's certainly up toward the top. So trying to vision what do you actually need once you sell your business to meet all of your lifestyle needs, and how those might change. Like maybe, how do you want to take care of children and grandchildren? The better you are at defining these, the better the chance that you're going to reach your goals and the outcomes. It also may surprise you when you go down this road of defining things, what it actually looks like, and how well positioned your business is now to achieve those goals. So once you know what that number is and you see where you are now, that will help develop the plan on how do you get to where you want to go and get the outcome that you want.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way that a financial plan is really the centerpiece of most of the work we do with all clients, I think that financial planning piece becomes the center of the business planning in a lot of ways that we do for business owners in particular. Can you guys give us some particular examples? Oliver, any case studies or examples you can give us here?
Yeah, I was, I guess, part of or involved with a transaction where a family was selling a $120 million business, so decent size, and did everything correctly from a financial planning perspective, from an administrative perspective, and it was really financially the best outcome they could possibly have hoped for. I think he would have been very happy, the seller, if he'd sold it for 80 million and he got 120 on the table. But the deal fell apart because he never took the time to speak to his wife about what's next. And all of a sudden it was, well, I want to be able to still do this and run that through the business. And I was doing this charitable donation, and that's not part of the financial plan. So all those intricacies, much like what Gail was talking about, of what do you want and need in terms of financial freedom once you sell. And as is the case with most closely held private businesses, you run a whole lot through the business that once you sell, you're not able to do anymore. So again, having that conversation in this case, and it ended up being fine in the long run, but the deal blew up and the buyers walked away because they just said, hey, you know what, we're not dealing with this drama.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I think so important that we're going to do another episode just on post-sale structuring and how to replace some of the framework, and not just from a tax perspective, but just how do I get done when things done when I don't have the business anymore that I've been kind of using as an organizing principle for a lot of my financial life.
In this case, his assistant would go with his ATM card and get money out of his ATM on a weekly basis. He didn't even know the PIN to his ATM card. Like it was just those little things It was just a
Yeah.
custom because that's how it's been done for the last 25 years. And now it's like, no, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Gail, do you have some examples you want to share with us?
I have an example of a situation where the owner wasn't as well prepared as he could have been going into the sale, but he had gone through the whole process, and it was the week of closing. So you can imagine he's had a couple of months of, all the drama associated with getting ready for the sale and the buyer's due diligence team coming in. Well, at the last minute, they realized that there was some impropriety with the retirement plan that was in place that would have exposed some legal and financial risks to the buyer. So the closing was canceled at that moment. It was postponed. And the buyer ended up having to go back and remedy the problem. But when they got back to the table to finalize the deal, it also meant that the sale price, took a little hit as well. And this is something that had he started earlier and did some of his own due diligence and uncovered the problem, it really would not have been an issue. So again, another real important reason to start early and do your homework and bring in the right advisors to help you out along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it kind of brings up a more general point of thinking of things from the perspective of the buyer, not just the seller, right? So we've been talking about our client, the seller, but it's important, I think, to think of it from the perspective of who's buying it, because that helps you figure out how they will evaluate it and where they'll see risks and pros and cons. Can you guys talk more about that, about how buyers approach things and how they evaluate? Oliver, I think I started with you before, so Gail, do you want to start?
Yeah, that's probably one of the best pieces of advice as we can give is to look at your business critically the same way that a buyer will. And to give you an example, most buyers, when they come to the table, they're looking for growth. So the more that you can communicate what your growth story is, the better. The second piece that is really important to buyers is avoiding risk. So for example, I gave the example of there was risk with the retirement plan, but there's a lot of risk in things that you may not recognize as an owner now. One of is a concentration of customers. So if the majority of your sales are coming from a limited number of customers, even though you've had a great growth trend and everything else looks good, to a buyer, that's a real red flag. But if you know that up front, then you can take action to expand what your client base is and basically eliminate that problem. So those are some really good examples of what a buyer might look at. The other is the other motivations for the buyer. They may be looking for a specific product line or a specific geographic area where they don't have that exposure now. So the more that you learn about that, the more you can create the story about your own company and how that can be very, very attractive to that buyer.
Oliver, can you add anything there?
Spot on. I think the most dangerous line a business owner who's looking to sell can use is, I am the business.
Yeah, right.
Right. And there's a lot of pride that goes into building the business. There's a lot of pride that goes into being the chief everything. But from a buyer's perspective, that's really, really bad, because I'm buying you out,
Right,
and you're leaving. And if you're the business, then what am I buying? So I think that's a critical component. And to Dale's point, look at things critically. This is not about making yourself feel better and saying, look at what I've done, patting yourself on the back. It's saying, hey, these group of professional buyers are coming in and they're going to beat me up. And they're going to do everything they can to devalue the business, because it means they have to write a smaller check. What can I do to fix these things and improve them so that they have less excuses to mark down the value?
Yeah. The process of making yourself redundant, being unnecessary to the business, is kind of inimical to a business owner who's trying to make things efficient and everything. But ultimately, when you're trying to sell, that's what you need to show is, you don't need me. I've built something that will run by itself. Anything you guys want to add there?
think this sort of underscores what we said at the very beginning, which is why you also need time, because this is an example where maybe some of the early advice you get is that to replace yourself, you need to develop the next generation of leaders. It may be somebody that's already involved in the company. It may be an existing key employee, or you may have to start a search to, acquire or hire somebody that can fill that role and then train them and make sure that your current customers are comfortable with this person and that they will also stay on board post-transaction when maybe you're ready to retire. So that means not only hiring the right person and giving them time to season, but also making sure that you have the right incentive plans in place to make sure that they do stay on board and there's a reason for them to do that through the transaction. So lots of things to think about and lots of things to do, which is again why starting early allows you to put them all in place.
Oliver, given that
I would add one thing, which is I think this is the point where a business consultant can really shine and provide a tremendous amount of value, because they're going to look at it through a much more neutral lens than any business owner really wants to or probably is able to.
So in addition to consultants, what other steps would you do to increase the business value and make sure you maximize what you're getting on the way out?
Well, I mean, the value of the business is a combination of, or a multiple of revenue or EBITDA in a range, right? And the range, unfortunately, is kind of beyond your control because it's driven by the overall environment. But where you fall on that range, in other words, a financial services business may trade between 8 and 10 times EBITDA. If your EBITDA is $5 million, that's a pretty big difference. That's a $10 million swing in value of the business, whether you're at the bottom end, like 8 times, or at the high end, 10 times, or if you're super, super good, you might get 11 times. So there's big dollars involved. And so understanding that and working to make sure that you have processes in place, that everything is well documented. Gail mentioned the issue with the pension plan with a previous client, that those things are buttoned up and nice and neat and easy to understand has a tremendous impact. And again, these things all take time, and that's where working with, I think the first step to me is working with a financial planner and investment advisor, then working potentially with a banker or business broker to kind of understand what the landscape is, involving a business consultant if necessary, getting your accountant and attorney. And I'll kind of close it out from this topic with saying what's truly important is that there's one person in charge to make sure that everybody's communicating and everybody's working in unison in the same direction. Because when you start having people just kind of go right and left and not communicating, you're creating 3 times the work and it becomes very inefficient.
And I just wanted to cap that off by sharing a really good success story. It's really kind of the dream exit where a business owner, well before the exit, so they thought they were 5 years away from an exit. And they were very diligent and thoughtful. And they sat down with an investment banker and they said, this is what we're planning to do. Give us some real feedback. Tell us what we need to do to be on track to exit in 5 years. And they got that really good advice. And the key components of it was that they were a little small. And so they were encouraged to grow their revenue to it, as Oliver just described, so that they would gain a higher multiple when they ultimately went to exit. The other was the classic problem where the owner was the one-man show and he needed to find his replacement. Well, they really took this advice to heart. And they ended up hiring someone as a sales manager that was sort of being groomed to also be the successor, put an incentive compensation plan in place. That sales manager helped them develop a sales growth trajectory. They came very close to being on target with that. They didn't meet their 5-year objective. It ended up getting pushed out to about another 2 years, but they ended up getting far more money than they ever expected. And it was all because they met with somebody early and then mapped out a plan and then took the time to execute. It was really kind of the dream situation. I think that all advisors want to suggest that their business owning clients do and follow.
Yeah, I think, a point that you made there, I want to emphasize, Oliver mentioned that there are some things that you just can't control, right? What industry you're in, what rates or interest rates are like, in the background, macroeconomic things, that kind of stuff. But size is something you can control, right? So your EBITDA, you might be able to increase not just by doing great and taking a little more time and letting yourself grow more, but you may do acquisitions and other things that grow your EBITDA. And as a result, you're in a different range because you're not a $5 million business, you're now a $50 million business. And the range that applies there is just a higher range in that particular industry. Now, you each mentioned a few types of advisors. I'd like to take a step back a second and talk more about just what does a bench look like? What is the team that you should be putting in place if you're a business owner? Because that sounds like it's one of the most important steps early on as you're trying to think through this. Oliver, who are the players there?
I mean, I think the financial planner, the accountant, the lawyer, the business consultant, and then either an investment banker or business broker, depending on the size of your business and the type of industry that you're in. Those are the key components. To me, in my experience, is if you have a very strong people and well-qualified team members, you don't need a huge team. You don't need 20 people sitting around the room because that ends up being somewhat wasteful. But those are kind of the minimum critical components that I think are, and given the fact if you're a seller of a business, I think that having the financial planner, investment advisor first and talking about the future is the first person that you want to engage with and share the fact that you're looking to sell the business so that thought process about your future can begin.
That makes sense. I mean, especially given that planner or advisor would also be advising the business owner, not just about sale, but about a whole bunch of other things in their financial life. Gail, sorry, what did you want?
No, well, I was going to add to that is that one of the things that's kind of interesting when you think about all the advisors that surround a business owner, a wealth advisor is one that can actually be involved from before the sale, during the sale, and after the sale, where some of the other advisors are really more distinctly involved during the transaction itself. But it also ties into what we talked about earlier, which is if you set your goals first and you start early enough, then, some of the key people that you may already have on your advisory team might be the wealth advisor and also your existing accountant and attorney. So that's a good place to start. And they can often help you bring the other members of the team on, such as the investment banker, the transaction attorney that might be involved just for the process itself. So really important for it all to work together that way.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of your accountant and your attorney, I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a very specialized field. And so they may be great accountants, they may be great attorneys, but they may not have the expertise for the sale of a business, especially if it's a larger entity. And so asking them for, hey, who would you hire for this? And asking a business consultant, who would you hire for this, is important because you really want to have the strongest team possible.
Yeah. And I recognize we have a little bit of an interest in saying this, but I will point out also that of all the people that you listed there, we are, as planners, wealth managers, one of the only ones that don't charge by the hour. So it's easier to have like long, wide-ranging conversations with us because you don't feel like the meter is running as much. Okay, well, look, there's a lot here, and it sounds like there are a lot of ways that we could make mistakes. So what are the mistakes to avoid? What should we not do? And what are the places where you guys have seen people have particular problems?
I think one is where people get excited. Sometimes they get the knock on the door and somebody dangles a price tag in front of them and they get kind of really excited about that at that early stage, and they don't, go through the motions of, following a competitive prices or a competitive process. Maybe they think they're going to save a little bit on working with an investment banker. I think in most of those cases, you end up leaving a lot of money on the table. And keep in mind that most buyers are professional buyers. They have bought many, many companies, where as a seller, this is likely your first and only time at the bat. So just kind of responding to the price tag, which by the way, may differ from the first number they mention in the first conversation versus the one that you end up at the closing table with, might be very different after they go through the due diligence process. So I would say acting preemptively without really exploring what your options are.
And I guess I would add to that, that the places where we've seen that be the biggest problem are the people who really haven't thought about selling. They haven't done the pre-sale planning. And so that first call is exciting and like, wow, somebody wants my business. And it kind of resets their thinking. But as you said, you can end up leaving money on the table if you just jump at that. Oliver, can you tell us some more about mistakes to avoid?
Yeah, I mean, look, it comes down to not understanding or not fully understanding all of your options. The options to sell are obviously to sell to a competitor who might be very interested in acquiring you for strategic reasons, to a private equity firm that's probably going to be willing to pay the most, especially if you're rapidly growing, because they want to buy that growth. But you might want to consider an ESOP, an employee stock option plan, which, while not necessarily the best way to maximize the value of the business in terms of what you get out, allows you to potentially remain in the business, have control, be involved. So depending on your personality and how you envision your future, that may be a viable option. And then, of course, there's selling to the employees or management directly. So again, it's understanding all the options, what the bottom line looks like, the different types of valuations that would be applied from the different types of buyers, I think is important. And then, as I said in the very beginning, not speaking to your loved ones. And by speaking, I mean having a true dialogue and really trying to understand what they want and what their expectations are, as opposed to just saying, oh, by the way, hon, I'm selling the business. Right? That's not a conversation. That's just informing. And I think that's really important. And then and the last thing I would say, look, while every banker will tell you time is the killer of all deals, that doesn't mean you have to rush. And the more you plan, the more you think it through, the more information you have, the better or more likely that you have the best outcome possible than if you rush through and just make haphazard decisions.
What about places where people have kind of scrimped or haven't kind of paid what they need to pay? Like, what mistakes do business owners make there?
Yeah, well, I mean, thinking, we'll go back to what we talked about before with the team members. Oh, I don't want to pay for an investment banker. I have, I can do it myself kind of attitude. Last time I fixed a deck, it cost me twice as much than if I just hired somebody to do it for me. Same principle, right? There's certain things that while you may be a great business person, great entrepreneur, there's certain levels of expertise that just are with experts. And that's what it comes down to. I love, my general practitioner doctor, but I wouldn't go to him if I had a cardiac episode. Like, I'd go to a cardiac specialist. Think of it the same way. Think of ways of, don't scrimp on paying the investment banker fee, especially if they're working on some sort of commission mostly, and think that that's going to be, out there. And people have different views and different opinions, but look, think of it as a real estate transaction. Most people buy or sell their home using a realtor. With everything that's out there today, you can certainly do it on your own, but you're probably not maximizing value and getting the best outcome possible. And as I think Gail said very eloquently earlier, understanding what that best outcome looks like, what you want, helps guide and form those decisions.
Right.
And I just wanted to add a little bit to what Oliver talked about not willing to pay for things. One issue that comes up over and over and over again with owners when they start to think about selling the business is the quality of their accounting. They're using kind of very simplistic systems that work for them, but the buyer is going to want something a whole lot more sophisticated. So that's a common one that comes up over and over again, to upgrade your accounting system. So again, if you're thinking ahead, you're not going to have to do it in a race. You're going to do it where it's thoughtfully, and you can do it more effectively and cost effectively. And similar are other consultants. We've talked about different things you can do to grow the value of your business. Chances are you can't do that on your own effectively without getting outside help. There are just a wide range of consultants that can really make a really critical difference in the business, but you've got to have a plan. You've got to bring the right people in place and allow them to do their work. Again, it may seem like a cost up front, but more often than not, you're going to get that back and many times over at the sales table.
Yeah, I think I would also take us back around to one of our earlier conversation topics, which was just, start early. And failing to start early is one of the common mistakes we see, especially on some of the tax planning and that kind of thing. That
if you're saying to yourself, oh, you know what, I'm ready to retire. I'm going to sell the business in the next 6 months. There's a lot less that can be done than if you say, I'm planning on selling the business in 5 years. The one thing I will say, and I think is important also, is, and we talk about this from a financial planning perspective a lot with clients, plan for the unexpected. Walk through the scenario of the unexpected. You're not planning to sell for 5 years or 10 years? Great. What happens if you have a life event of some sort that forces you to sell in a year? What can you be doing today to improve the business and gradually march towards a desired outcome? That's really important too, because sometimes things happen in life that are beyond our control.
So look, this has been great. I thank you for your time. As we wrap it up, Oliver, is there a single piece of advice that you'd like to give to business owners who are thinking about selling, or maybe don't know they're thinking about selling, but will eventually think about it?
Think about the things that, maybe are unpleasant to think about. You talk, Mike, to us all the time about make yourself uncomfortable, right? Have the uncomfortable thought, the uncomfortable conversation, not to punish yourself, but just to understand what that potential outcome is and what you can do about it.
Yeah, that sounds like great advice. Gail, can you think of a piece of advice you would like to give business owners?
Absolutely. I think the common refrain we have all heard over and over again is, I wish I would have known more about the process before I started to sell the business. So starting early and actually learning about what goes on in due diligence, a lot of the things that we already talked about today, which is, the value of starting early, what buyers are looking for, those are all really important. But learn now, even if you're 10 years out, the information, knowledge, is an important arrow in your quiver. So I would learn as much as I can as early as I could.
Well, look, this has been really informative. I really appreciate you joining us for this second episode of our Business Owner Bootcamp podcast. We've been joined by Oliver and Gail, two advisors at Wealthspire who really specialize in working with business owners. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to you further.